Welcome to another episode of the Symphony podcast, where we break down one important topic each week in under 30 minutes or less. Today's Micropod Monday, and we've got a great topic today with a fantastic guest coming to us from Sayulita, Nayarit, Dr. Aaron Roughan, and today's topic is on nervous system regulation. A big one, especially in the last year, and just overall being in control of our emotions and also understanding why things are happening on a biological and nervous system level. So I'm going to kick it to you, Dr. Aaron, to give us a little bit of background about what you've been studying, what you've been dedicating your life to, why you're so passionate about it, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Well, it's good to be here. Yeah, I've been fascinated in this operating system we call the nerve system for a long time, before I even knew much about the nerve system. So I came from psychology. I did a degree in health psychology and behavioral change, and then I worked with autistic kids and ADHD kids, and then I wanted to know more about the brain and the body, so I went and did 5 years at chiropractic college. And then as a practitioner, life presents different challenges. New Zealand and Christchurch, and we had the 10-year anniversary was last week, the week before. We had big earthquakes in Christchurch where everybody in the city got affected. So a lot of patients were coming in with this body pain, this tension, and they didn't know why, because there was no mechanical mechanism of injury why they'd have this neck pain or back pain. And it's because there's accumulation of stress. And so I delved in more into a certain technique called Neuroemotional technique and Applied Kinesiology, which I've known about because my father's a practitioner also. Just the ability to be able to test, a lot of muscle testing, a lot of functional neurology testing to get an understanding why people are holding tension in their body. So I've been fascinated with the way that the body impacts the mind and the way that the mind impacts the body ever since. A series of events that we tend to call coincidences. I ended up in Mexico doing a workshop with Dr. Joe Dispenza, which a lot of people have heard of now, about neurobehavioral change. I first followed him when he came to college in 2006, and he had a really big thing of, if we know what our next 6 months is going to look like, then we're probably not going to create something new. It's probably going to be something we've already done. So that planted a seed for me, and I was, okay, I'm not going to go back home to, I was working in Sydney at the time. I don't know what I'm going to do, but follow my bliss, I guess. And I ended up in this town in Sayulita, and it's been 3 years. It's been amazing. I get to help and see some amazing people. I get to collaborate with some amazing people. I get to see people that have come down here on vacation or they've decided to live here. People that are working nomads, digital nomads, that are looking for a different way of being in the world. So it's a cool, creative, fun little place to be. It's cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. And also welcome to the show, Dr. Aaron. It's awesome to have you on here. I've heard a lot about you from Kyle, and I know that you guys had a chance to link up when he was down in Mexico. And right after that happened, he talked to me and was like, we got to get him on the show immediately. He dropped so much knowledge and is just a really interesting, fascinating guy with some really cool practices. And honestly, I'm kind of in need of some of that right now. I woke up with the worst kink in my neck that I've had in a long time. So I'm like, what? Maybe that's some stored stress that's really going on, that's being covered up in some way or another. But I think one thing that we've kind of mentioned on this show before, so I would love to hear you go a little bit more into it, is just the concept of how the body stores stress and how that shows up physically within your body without really even knowing it. So can you kind of maybe give a few examples of how that's showed up maybe in some of your clients or what that typically looks like from your end?
Yeah, sure. So we have this operating system called our nerve system, our autonomic nerve system, which happens without us thinking about it. Most people have heard of the idea of the fight or flight or freeze component of our nerve system called our sympathetic nerve system. And then the complementary opposite of that, because we are, to get deep on it, the human physiology, we are part of the universe. So there's complementary opposites in in everything around us. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest, digest, repair, and detox. And when we're in that alert phase, or we're in that stimulatory phase where there's these news alerts all the time, then all of that gets taken in by our brain. And when that's stimulated for a long period of time, there's a certain manifestation of how that looks like in the body. So the head will come forward slightly, the pupils will bring in more light, because this system of ours that's hundreds of thousands of years old is more alert now, more aroused to the threats around us. So our hearing will get more sensitive, the jaw may become really tight, we'll start collecting our shoulders as earrings as the upper traps and the levator scap and scalenes get tighter. The scalenes are the muscles at the front of the neck, which is their accessory breathing muscles. When we're in that part of our brain, we're not going to be breathing the same from our diaphragm. So from about nipple line, about T7, T6, thoracic vertebra, superior and anterior, we get more nerve and blood supply, because we need to either protect ourselves, so the shoulders come forward, or we're getting ready to fight. And so it's the opposite down below. So the pelvis will tilt, more blood and nerve flow to the hamstring, to the calves, because we're ready to run. We're ready to either run or we're ready to fight. And so that's got to come from somewhere. So it gets shafted or shifted from our digestive system to our muscles. So we're ready to be more active. And that initially can feel really good, because we're more alert, we've got more energy, we're using more resources, blood sugar is going to change in the body. We're ready to go. But then when we stay in that state, the body's going to accumulate some of that tension. So that can be one reason why my shoulder's so sore, why my hamstring's so tight, why is my lower back playing up? Because we're in that fight or flight, that sympathetic dominant posture. And then it affects hormones, it affects metabolism, it affects females' menstrual cycles, the list goes on and on and on. When it comes to emotions can be stored in the body too, purely because the nerve system's main role is protection and connection. Its main role is not to wake up in the morning and let's be the healthiest version of ourselves. It's protection and it's connection. So just like when there's a stress going, our body will be in a certain posture. It'll also, when there's something traumatic happens to us, it's going to take a snapshot of that event. So the silly metaphor I always use is, pretend we've come from another planet, we don't understand the concept of heat or being burnt. We could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, or we could just put our finger for a millisecond on a hot element, and we're never ever doing that again on purpose. Because we're like, okay, that thing that I just touched was really uncomfortable. I'm not going to do that again. So it takes a snapshot of these things that are traumatic. And trauma can be capital T, like some kind of abuse and really heavy stuff, or it can be like a small t, just anything that we're unprepared for, that our system didn't have resources for, that created a stress response that we didn't know what to do with. So these snapshots, if you like, are taken by a part of our brain to do with memories and emotion, called our limbic brain. So that our limbic brain takes snapshots of these traumatic moments, so we remember them. And so, because the nerve system is all about protection, so please don't do that again. And then through Chinese traditional medicine and some ancient ways of looking at the body, there's certain organs that are associated with certain types of emotions. And the way I describe it, it's like having computer screens open in the background on our computer. And so if we've accumulated a lot of this emotional traumatic stress, if you like, and we don't know what to do with it, like the conscious mind is like, we want to go towards pleasure and stay away from pain. So our conscious mind is saying, well, I don't know how to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. Let's go do the 1,000 things that I can do right now to distract myself. And so it's like these window tabs in the background of the computer stay open. And we can go through life, but then we may get triggered, or we may get a certain event happen to us. And these screens, if you like, come to the forefront, and we get a large reaction about it. So that's one way to describe it.
I forgot how much I love your analogies, Dr. Aaron. And also, if anyone's listening, they want to listen to you and I talk for almost 2 hours. We had a fantastic conversation more about your journey on the Adventure Creator podcast. And as well, I joined you for an afternoon retreat with a handful of men to talk about emotions, basically. And we actually did some neuroemotional therapy. Is that what it's called? And maybe describe a little bit about what you were talking about. You mentioned the applied kinesiology and how that works, but there's so much that you just mentioned. There's so much in there that you just talked about, from how the body stores different emotions in different places. And I think ultimately, one of the biggest things that I've taken away from interacting with you is just understanding why some of these things are happening. If we just think we're stressed out today because of like a surface level reason, or maybe we didn't sleep well last night, but then there's these underlying things that we need to work on. And what I find so interesting about your perspective on this is that you are a chiropractor by practice, but you're very, very focused on what's going on in people's lives outside of the physical. So when I came in with an ankle injury, you know, we sorted that out, but then instantly there's other things start to pop up as one thing gets looser and more flexible or whatnot, then other places in the body where stress has been stored start to appear. Are there any things, because maybe we're in a place right now where things are all good, like we don't feel any tension or stress, like maybe I'm feeling pretty good right now. I had a coffee, I'm talking to you guys, but I know there's some challenges coming in the future. So are there any things that you do or you recommend to your clients to build that resilience, if you will, towards when a challenge does arise in the future?
Sure. Yeah, there's a few things that, like one thing can be just asking the question, what's required of me right now that's uncomfortable? Like sometimes I saw a guy just yesterday, and he had this big thing at work, and he said he put off for 3 months. He didn't want to face, and he tried to find ways around it, and he wasn't sleeping well, and he had all this stress. And so, yeah, you could get massages or get adjusted, or you could do many things to help him not feel so uncomfortable in his body. But often the question is, well, if you feel that discomfort, rather than the conscious mind going, okay, let's get away from that, let's go towards pleasure, it's asking the opposite question about what is required of me right now that's uncomfortable. And so I always like one of my most humorous things about life is the contradiction, it seems. Like we all want to have more pleasure and less pain, but the more pleasure we tend to seek now, or the more comfort we're looking for now, the more discomfort we tend to create. But if we go towards the discomfort now, it just seems interesting to me how we tend to make more comfort, because we're, you know, if we want to have more discomfort in our spine, just sit in the most comfortable chair you can for the 12 hours a day for the next month or two. You know, you're going to create a lot of discomfort in your spine, even though in the short term you're having a lot of comfort. So it's sometimes just those simple questions like, what is required of me that's uncomfortable? So maybe having that conversation with the boss, like in this gentleman's case yesterday. It may be facing up to some things. It could be taking responsibility for something. It could be putting oneself at cause rather than blaming people around us. So those little things are important. I think another really important step is, I think we touched on it a little bit, Kyle, in that little mini workshop I did, is just understanding our own drives and our own meaning and purpose is so important. So I call them an exercise around finding people's personal truths. It's the study of axiology, which is the study of human meaning and purpose, because understanding that will give us an idea about, well, what is it that I'm driven towards? What is it that I want to make a difference in? What is it? Gives me an idea about my own perception, about why I perceive things a certain way. Because if people have got a certain different set of personal truths, then we're going to see the world very differently. Like I say to people, we don't see the world how it is. We see the world based on our experience of our nerve system. So if we're feeling super stressed and uptight, then surprise, surprise, the world around us seems pretty stressed and uptight. And then once we understand about what our personal truths are, then it really allows us to focus on and gives like a few keys of understanding. Okay, this is important to me. This is not important to me. I see it this way because of how I see the world. These things I want to label nice, kind, caring. These things I want to label mean because they go against my personal truths. So understanding that concept can really make a difference.
Definitely. That's really interesting to think about. And I know you touch a lot on alignment, and that's something that's pretty central to your practice, it seems like. And then I also loved what you said about kind of going towards things that are uncomfortable, because that's another thing that we've talked about on the show a lot, is how sometimes stress is the entry level for neuroplasticity in your mind, and going towards things that are sometimes difficult actually creates more neuron connections in your mind, which ultimately flows up to your perception of the world. And just like you're saying, if no matter what's going on in your body, it's reflected in the way that you're seeing the world in some way or another. Something that we like to focus on on this show specifically is just giving our listeners very tactical, tangible advice that they can plug into their daily life. So I'd be curious to hear from you, just because it sounds like, in Kyle's experience this too, like a session with you is incredible, right? You feel very hands-on, you feel like you're there, you have all these answers in the moment. But what are some things that our listeners can take away from not having a personal session with you, but things that they can think about daily, or activities that they can do to just plug into their life every single day?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, good question. I like sometimes answering it the opposite way that people may expect. So it's having some time where you're not thinking, having some time where you're playing. And just like a class I did yesterday with a friend of mine, we were doing these strange, silly movements. And like I say to people, if you feel like what you're doing, you're looking silly or you're looking a little bit stupid, then you're probably doing it right, because that's the conscious mind just taking a break. Like just that conscious mind of, I should be doing it this way, I should be doing it that way, maybe I should be better doing it this way, maybe that's not right, maybe this is more correct. Having times where you're just being silly and the mind's like, well, this is a bit weird. Like giving that conscious mind a break, just like children would. So having some moments where you just play, just silly play. It's so relaxing for the brain. The conscious mind gets to chill out. You get to make new nerve connections because you're doing something new and you're failing, but you're not beating yourself up really hard about it, just like a child would. So some moments when you get to play rather than like a 1,000 things to-do list. All of those things are beautiful too, but just some moments when you get to like just play, let loose, be silly, having some time for that, especially for the tension and the seriousness of the last 12 months or so. That's one thing.
I remember talking to you, Dr. Aaron, and you told me a little bit about one of your clients and how they were complaining about how work just was so hard and they were not enjoying it at all. And you basically asked them, what would it look like to bring more play to work? You don't need a whole new job. You don't need to go have a crazy transition in life, but how do you bring play into the work that you do? Because there's probably some chiropractors out there that see their job as an accountant sees punching numbers into a spreadsheet, but you see the same exact activity as a life-giving thing that brings you joy and that you have purpose around. So what are some of the things that you would recommend there to just bring play into the day-to-day?
Yeah, and there's times, there's certainly times where it feels more like work. Like I'm not sitting and playing La La Land all the time, but it's the moments when I'm less in my head. There is times where you've got to like learn how to do a skill, and you've got to break it down and like, very consciously and using a lot of brain power to understand how to do something. But then it's the less I'm in my head and the more that I'm just in my body and trusting and touching and feeling and really getting into the feminine, like creating and flowing and playing. Often with a lot of guys I see, if I say to them, okay, do this little stretch or do this exercise 5 times, and in the masculine mind, it's like, well, if I do it 10 times, it's twice as good. So it's like pushing it, doing way too much, go, give me some steps, which is all well and beautiful, but it's moments when we can just ease out of that mind and go into that play. I had someone recently who was really upset, really stressed, because she was saying, in her perception, people around her weren't doing the work, and she was always doing the work to kind of clear emotions and to be able to see the world differently and turning up in a different way. She's like, I'm always doing the work. I'm doing the work for my partner. I'm doing my work for my family. I'm doing the work for my clients. I'm doing all this work. And so similar to what you're saying, Kyle, I said to her, I was like, what if that could be play? What if that could be like doing the work could be doing the play? Like going and being silly somewhere, or going shifting emotions by playing, or shifting the emotions by singing or dancing or jumping in the ocean. It doesn't have to be sitting down and writing out lists and lists of certain things. So if people have access to it, one thing that's always beautiful is being in nature. If it doesn't matter the weather, just having time in nature and feeling it on your skin, breathing in nature, observing the cycles of nature. That's a beautiful exercise for people to do. If they're able to get, even if it's a park or being out in nature is something that's a really, hopefully a simple thing for most people. The other thing is just moving in a way that gives you joy. There can be a lot of emotional charge around this word exercise, just like there can be a charge around the word diet. And so I often say to people, I don't want you to ever diet. I want you to eat food that feels nourishing and joyous for you. Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? Or what does moving in a joyous way look like for you? What the heck is that? What does moving in a way that gives you joy, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And then do some variation with it. So move in a way that's different and playful. And so often if people are not used to that, they'll be like, well, what is that? And they'll ask me, but I'm like, you go discover it and tell me about it next week.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's spot on to a lot of things that I've experienced in my own life, just through physical movement and practicing with yoga, and then paying more attention to nutrition and what's going into my body and how it connects to my mental health and just output in general. So I'd love to hear your take on kind of how, because I know you're involved in the yoga community as well. And I know these two things kind of are a slight contradiction to each other, just the concept of being aligned and completely in formation and how you should be, but then also flow and movement. And so I'd kind of like to hear your take on the balance of those two things, but then also on how just movement in general flows up into your mental health and your perception of yourself, but also of the world, and kind of like what that connection looks like and what's going on physiologically in the body that's making those reactions happen.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, well, it's a negative feedback loop. So if we have certain thoughts and feelings, then our body's going to manifest that in a certain way. When I used to work with autistic and ADHD kids, we'd play these games about someone walking into the room and like, tell me what emotion they're feeling. And then we did it in reverse. Like, if you were really sad, what would you look like? If you're really happy, what would you look like? And so children know about how the body will manifest what's going on in our head and what we're feeling. And it's a negative feedback loop. So if we've got a certain stuck posture for a period of time, we're going to be getting what we call disafferentation, like a bad signal, if you like. So we could have a nice computer, but if the Wi-Fi signal is not great, then the image is not going to be great. So if that signal going back up to the cerebellum and into the motor cortex is not great, then the brain may be going, oh, okay, there's probably stress here. Perhaps there's a stress here, so the amygdala is going to stay more alert. So it's don't go into relax mode. So it's that negative feedback loop. If the body's in a certain posture, the mind's going to have certain thoughts, potentially we're going to have certain feelings, and vice versa. They did a study at a university where they strapped these university students always great guinea pigs. They strapped them to a chair in this forward posture, and it was harder for them. They didn't know what the task was about, but it was harder for them to think of uplifting images and for more hope and positivity in the future than the people that were in an upright position. So it's that negative feedback loop. And the way that I see alignment, so yes, alignment in structural alignment in how the freedom to be able to express emotions, and then alignment to our personal truth, like understanding what our personal truths are, because if we expect ourselves to live outside of them, that we're not going to have alignment and we're going to have frustrations. But to me, that alignment is, it's not rigid. To me, that alignment is just understanding, okay, this is where I feel in my alignment. This is where I feel in my alignment. So to me, it's a real crossover with that flow. And yes, some of yoga can be quite rigid. Some of yoga was designed by the masculine, by men, like that control, like warrior pose, like stay in that alignment. And I think there's a time and place for that. I think that's really cool. But there's absolutely a time for understanding that flow, understanding that my pelvis wants to tuck under, or understanding that pelvic tilt, understanding my knee alignment may be different to the person next to me. So those individualities, I think, are really important. I think there's a time and place for that rigidness and that focus and that control, but absolutely important to have that flow. There's a breathwork teacher of mine in Sydney. She called herself the Renegade Yogi, and she really planted a lot of seeds for me, and just being in a posture, but then flowing into it, like allowing the spine to have some waves and the pelvis to move, and rather than all these rules. And a big thing with the group work that I do my best to express is finding your own rhythm, and rather than copying everybody else, rather than being a sheep, rather than listening to everybody else how you should do it, finding that for yourself. So once we have that alignment, what does it feel like when the chest and the manubrium, sternum is up, the head's back, all of this, but then what does it feel like then to bring in that flow? What does it feel like to collapse into that? What does it feel like in different places? So it's really finding people's own rhythm with their own alignment and their own flow. Like it's a bit of a play with it.
It's very coincidental that you bring up flow and how that connects to our feminine side. I just did a wellness warrior takeover, which is where I take the Instagram account from a mental health nonprofit called the Scooty Fund. And the topic that I focused on this week was balancing our masculine and feminine sides. And the punchline that I kind of came to, and the angle I came to it from, was if we are out of alignment, if we're leaning too far masculine, bottling up our emotions, trying to stay too rigid, like kind of what you're talking about physically, but also emotionally in our relationships or whatnot.
Yeah.
Or on the other side, if we're too emotional or we're like too loosey-goosey or whatever, there's all these different kind of elements of feminine and masculine. Having a balance is so key. And I'm going to tie that straight into the Symphony platform, which is built around the idea of balance. If you want to live a healthy life, you can't just be a master in one area. You need to like dabble in different regions and continue learning. So my question is, how does having a good balance of our masculine and feminine sides impact our mental health?
Yeah, nice question. How does it impact our mental health? Well, it allows us to practice. It's like asking someone, how would throwing a football help you in being a quarterback? Or, like it's that practice. Like I get to, like the concept and the understanding of it is one thing, but the practicing of it is where the rubber hits the road. It's like, how do I practice being the wild man? How do I practice being the archetype of the lover? How do I practice being the young curious boy? How do I practice being someone who feels anger and rage? I saw a guy, again, it was this week, and he's like a meditation guy. He reads a lot of books on spirituality. Really lovely guy. His father was quite a bottled up kind of angry person, so he's kind of done the opposite. Like he's done so much of the spirituality, but he's not sleeping. He's got this inner turmoil still, and he's trying to meditate more. So my role for him was like, express that anger, express the rage, like express that. And he's like, oh, I don't, but I've been working on not doing that. I was like, exactly. You can only put the lid on a volcano for so long. But rather than this judgment we have around emotions, like I want to be more of this or less of that, that's when we run into trouble. Because we have this judgment thinking, well, if I practice this so much, then I'm going to have less of this one, then I'm going to be okay. But we live like the full quantum field of the universe that we live in is both sides. So how do we get to practice both sides? We can't all just be peaceful living under a tree forever. We've got to, like, there's moments when, okay, let's without impacting anybody else, how do we practice that anger, that rage, that frustration? And I tell clients, one entity that can always handle that is nature, like screaming under the ocean, or chopping some wood, or going for a big run, or nature can handle that. Like, nature is the feminine. Nature can handle, is the vessel, is the chalice that can handle the insecurities and the anger and the frustration of the masculine. So that's why a lot of guys, they love going out in nature. So how it helps with mental health, it's knowing that if I get to practice these different elements of it, just like if we're doing a sports game, if I get to practice these different elements of, like, I'm going to use a rugby analogy, which may not be that relevant to your listeners, but if I'm going to practice tackling, passing, kicking, all of these different skills, then of course in a game I'm going to be a much better player. So if we get to practice these emotions in a healthy way, around anger, around frustration, around grief, around sadness, around vulnerability. Vulnerability is a big one. That's hard for guys. That's hard for me. If we get to practice joy and practice play, if we get to practice that in the game of life, we're going to be way better prepared and way more centered and balanced, because we're going to be more resilient and adaptable for everything around us.
Super well said. Super well said. My microphone over here is dying. I've got wind blowing over here. We're coming up on 30 minutes. Matthew, do you have any other questions for Dr. Aaron?
I guess I know we briefly touched on it, just on the nutrition side of things, but just out of curiosity too, I would like to hear your take on your own personal nutrition and the foods that you like to eat, and how you think that connects to kind of everything that we've been talking about so far.
Nice. Yeah, well, I'm in Mexico, so it can be a little bit, it can work in my favor sometimes, and it can work against my favor sometimes, because I think one of the most toxic things that we're exposed to is reheated vegetable oil. So, and if people don't know that, then they're going to just buy the cheapest oil to cook with. And so a lot of things here are cooked with that vegetable oil. So I've got to make a conscious effort to have less of that. I mean, none of that is always best. But otherwise, I'm a big fan of having a lot of the fermented foods that the locals, whatever's from that area. So rather than, yes, a good probiotic is really important, but wherever you live, what is it that people in that area use as fermented food? So here it could be sauerkraut, it's kombucha, it's pulque, which is from the agave plant, and they put it with different flavorings, just to allow that microbiome to be strong and to be diverse. Sugar, Coca-Cola is enough. I mean, I don't drink any of that stuff, but Coca-Cola and sugar is obviously a nasty one that impacts people. But I do my best to get good quality meat, get my fermented foods from different sources, vegetables from the local, the Friday Farmers Market is on now, so straight after this I'm going to go back down there. Organic eggs, of course, so you're not having all that grain-fed inflammation coming at you. Yeah, there's some things I've got good access to here in Mexico, some things not as much because it's a small town, but good oils, the good fats, fermented food, good protein source, good plant-based stuff. I'm certainly not perfect.
We're all doing our best though, right? And then just one more thing too that I'm curious about, and I think that our listeners will appreciate as well, is just any books or resources or podcasts or websites or anything that you've listened to or personal favorites that have helped you on your journey that could potentially help some of our listeners as well.
Yeah, lots. Yeah, good question. Tequila would be in that list too, if those last things about food and drink. Tequila. I really, really dislike tequila in New Zealand, but the tequila here is good. Yeah, I used to read a lot of books. I don't read so much anymore, but I do like listening to interviews and podcasts. So Brené Brown is someone that I've really enjoyed listening to lately.
Love
she
her.
does a lot of work around vulnerability and connection. Joe Dispenza, of course, that brought me to Mexico. I've been following him for a long time. He's got some great interviews out there about the power to create something new. Dr. Bruce Lipton, his book's called The Biology of Belief. We were lucky enough that he would fly down to New Zealand. He taught us immunology. So if people want a good resource about understanding the immune system, Dr. Bruce Lipton and the power, and he's a cell biologist, was basically doing stem cell research before it was called stem cell research, about how cells change according to what environment they're in. So our environment plays such a huge part. And I see a lot of people that come out of their normal comfort zone of North America and they come down here to Mexico, and their world's so different, and everything starts unraveling and changing. So it's really powerful. I could give you a lot of names. Dr. John DeMartini has been a mentor of mine for a long time. For me, he really linked the mind and the body really powerfully for me, and about how the quantum physics and the quantum field, and finding that full quantum, and how emotions will push us away from that full quantum and how to balance them up. He's really powerful. Dr. Gabor Mate, I've been listening to him lately about his addiction stuff. His stuff's been really cool. Yeah, I could go on, but
that's a pretty good list. That's a good list for people to dive into.
Yeah, people pretty busy. The last one would be Dr. Zach Bush. I really like his work.
My girlfriend works for his company, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
really
at Farmer's Footprint.
I just had his little Restore drink earlier before. It's from him.
Is it the Ion Biome one?
It's the Restore something.
Okay, yeah.
His stuff. The thing I love about him is his ability to I always have, for me personally, I always hold more credence for people who are not only obviously educated and studied a lot, but are people who are actually on the ground, helping people. So, Dr. Zach Bush, coming from emergency room physician stuff, but his ability to link up how the environment's impacted, how nature's so impacted, like his ability to do that is really beautiful. And his podcast with Rich Roll, it's pretty long. I think it's like 2.5, 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful stuff. It's cool.
Yeah.
It gives us hope for humanity. Like, he's one of those special kind of humans that, wow, he did an awesome post the other day, I think, or the other week, about autism, and now in his opinion, that there's so less brain power being used for language and understanding comprehension, that they're more of a 5-dimensional way of seeing the world, and very differently to how we see it. And that really connected with me, because I used to work with kids on the autistic spectrum, and it's sometimes I thought, am I here teaching them, or are they teaching me? There's mysteries and stuff that we don't understand that I find pretty interesting. So there's plenty of names to keep people busy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating, and there's so many more things that I feel like we could go into, and I know that we hope to have you back on the show at some point so that we can continue to pick your brain and get more insight and resources from you. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, really, really cool question. So it's cool that you guys are doing these things and looking at how we can enhance this human experience, and looking at the feminine and looking at that neuroplasticity. Like, it's important stuff, It's awesome.
Yep. And a lot of the stuff you just talked about today has given me some channels to go down, some strings to pull on and learn more. We'll link some of those resources that you mentioned. And if anyone does want to follow you, you gotta drop your Instagram here, because you're always sharing good insights. And then also highly recommend, if you make it down to anywhere in Nayarit, Jalisco, if you go to Sayulita, gotta come into Paraíso Yoga and see you. So let folks know where they can find you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm in this small little cool town, and in Mexico, where I work in a few different places at retreat centers, and we host little small retreats or see people one-on-one, and do group stuff with collaborations with some amazing people down here. Instagram, I don't post that much on there, but I've got stuff on there. It's Being Aligned, or I think it's Dr. Aaron Being Aligned. You will find me. The website's the same, beingaligned.com.au. Yeah, any questions, reach out. Thanks, guys, for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron. And till next time, thanks for listening. Micropod Monday. You can check out what we're doing on the Symphony at thesymphonycode.com. And we're going to be getting on Clubhouse. We're going to be just doing some cool new things to try and engage a little bit more and provide more value to our community. There's a growing community here, and we're stoked that everyone is getting involved. So thanks for listening.
That wind is crazy.
Dude, it's crazy. I've been like muting and unmuting my mic this whole time.
That's so
I don't know
funny.
what to do. It wasn't happening before this, but yeah, thanks for bearing with me, guys.